Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, readers, bleeders and mercy pleaders, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I feel the most praiseworthy technician right now. As you well know, I have been plagued by the technological issues of the 21st century over the last week or so. My family, or at least a member of my family, parted with 500 sterling in order to buy me an up-to-date camera, and I haven't been able to access the 1080p 30 frame per second video footage until now. I feel within the company of Thorin Oakenshield, whose last light of Durin's day has shone upon the keyhole. I now have access to the halls of Erebor, and yes, I feel as if I am a particularly lucky individual right now. So yes, we've gotten through that, and I'm back with another video discussing Victorian literature, as I'm sure you could discern from the title of this video. First of all, I wanted to just outline something, or to adumbrate something. Since I went past 2,500 subscribers, I have had a great deal of call for access to myself. So I'm going to give you an avenue through which you might be able to access me more easily. So please don't email me. I've dropped my email in the description a few times, but that is filled with methods of penile extension and notifications detailing me the curvaceous nature of Sri Lankan women who are up for it in my area. So please don't email me. You'll just be, swamped in that type of licentious nonsense. But if you do want to follow me on Instagram, it is Joe_Spivey_. You'll be able to see many of my posts, usually just about what I'm uploading to YouTube. I very rarely post stories, or I never go anywhere. I never get a train, or I never go on a sailing boat. I never abseil down from a cliff face. So you're not going to get any insightful stories, but if I do review a book on there that isn't perhaps on the YouTube channel, then that's where it'll be. But anyway, I have been reading it came to my attention just about a week ago that I have been reading a discreditable amount of Victorian literature recently. Of course, my channel is devoted almost solely to canonical classics, with the notable exception of a bit of contemporary non-fiction and, some of my accoladed favourites, Martin Amis and that type of thing. But beyond that, it is mainly canonical classics, and I seem to also have a predisposition for Victorian literature as well. And I was wondering, beyond the temporally obvious definition of Victorian literature, i.e. works produced when Britain had the potentate named Victoria, between the years, roughly, I think it's 1837 to 1901, a very, very long reign. And yes, so I wanted to park that, I think, rather crude definition, and or at least inexact and injudicious and a little bit cliched definition, and punt for a few of my own. And I also wanted to look for the ingredients of a Victorian novel if we were part of the customs police or whatever, and we were looking, we were there in our jet-setting camel hair coats with our sunglasses on and our trilby hats, and we were looking for a suspicious, conspicuous-looking person coming into the country that was of a Victorian novelistic nature. What would we look for? What are the hallmarks? What are the distinguishing features of a Victorian novel, which come most easily and readily to mind? So I've got a few that I want to discuss. First of all, one of length. I have adumbrated at length on this channel on many occasions that I do indeed like big books, and I cannot lie. And because of serialisation and therefore and also much more prolonged attention spans within the Victorian populace, Mr. Dickens and Miss Elliot and Mr. Trollope, who are perhaps the great triumvirate of Victorian writers. Very controversial statement and assertion, I'm sure, but those guys were able to release huge wadding books. This, for example, is David Copperfield. This runs to in excess, I think, of 1,000 pages with the introduction and some of the notes in the back. And yeah, it's absolutely enormous, and this would be considered, a work of biblical longevity nowadays. You would never get this through the, whatever it is, like, what will it be? Probably about 300,000 words. This would never see light of day in 2024. It's far too long for the attention spans of a TikTok-addled readership. But thankfully the Victorians, they weren't able to watch Bob the Builder fornicating with a donkey on TikTok nor were they watching, Kim Kardashian cook lobster on the internet. So they had an awful lot of time to do what they wanted, and that is why the books are very, 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 very long indeed, some of them. So yes, that's one hallmark of a Victorian novel. Another one related to length as well, but on a microcosmic level, would be the multi-clausal compound sentences that are, abound in these works. They obviously, sometimes they are sort of untenable. Sometimes they are just, pretty saddening and, a little bit exhausting and tiresome. But most of the time, the long sentence gives the Victorian writer an opportunity to really, exhaust and really explore what it is that they're looking to force upon a reader. And that is something that, much like film shots in cinematography and in many other aspects of life, the average sentence length, I'm sure you're probably well aware, has been decreasing over time. And that is absolutely, I think, to the detriment of literature. And, it allows for, these long sentences allow for multifarious interpretations, and it allows you to just really get at the bedrock and the fundament, capital F, if you will. And I know you're going to let me. It really allows you to get to the fundament of what the guys are on about. So I thought I'd give you a shining example. This is the opening of David Copperfield, a Bildungsroman by Charles Dickens. This is right at the start. In consideration of the day and hour of my birth, it was declared by the nurse and by some sage women in the neighbourhood who had taken a lively interest in me several months before there was any possibility of our becoming personally acquainted, first, that I was destined to be unlucky in life, and secondly, that I was privileged to see ghosts and spirits, both these gifts inevitably attaching, as they believed, to all unlucky infants of either gender born towards the small hours on a Friday night. Now that wasn't particularly exploratory, as is so often the case with Mr. Dickens. He is really just sort of badgering and beavering away there rather than actually giving us great illumination. But yes, that's another hallmark of Victorian literature. Another one, which is completely gone nowadays, is one of authorial intervention. They were completely willing to break down the fourth wall and to make it known to their readers that this was all artifice. These were just, bits of ink on a page. This was not a world, a real, phenomenological world that they were sort of bringing up from the earth. They were exhuming from some grave. It is just, a collection of characters on a page that you happen to be concerned with. And that sometimes can be a little jarring. Again, our aforementioned Mr. Dickens does it. I think obviously you're always teetering when you do something like that, whether it's going to be playful or whether it's going to be sort of cloying and, whether it's going to be disenfranchising and whether they're just going to send it, whether a reader is going to send it windmilling across their study. But the person who I think is best at it, and this is a shining exemplar of how to do authorial intervention and address the reader, this is Anthony Trollope's Barchester Towers. I am an adamantine and unforgivable Trollopian. I would inhale his books if they were gaseous. But this is an example of him addressing the reader pleasantly and, I think doing it successfully. But let the gentle-hearted reader be under no apprehension whatsoever. It is not destined that Eleanor should marry Mr. Slope or Bertie Stanhope, the two characters in Barchester Towers, and here perhaps it may be allowed to the novelist to explain his views on a very important point in the art of telling tales. He ventures to reprobate that system which goes so far to violate all proper confidence between the author and his readers by maintaining, nearly to the end of the third volume, a mystery as to the fate of their favourite personage. Nay, more and worse than this is too frequently done. Have not often the profoundest efforts of genius been used to baffle the aspirations of the reader, to raise false hopes and false fears, and to give rise to expectations which are never to be realised? Are not promises all but made of delightful horrors, and yada 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 yada. You see how he is making it homely and involving, and is sort of easily making sure that it's a fireside chat rather than somebody bursting into the cinema and telling you that none of this is actually real and you're just watching, pixelations on a screen or a writer taking dictation. So I think it seems to be done an awful lot in Victorian literature when it certainly isn't done nowadays. Not that I read an awful lot of contemporary literature, but the stuff that I have got into, it doesn't showcase that whatsoever. And it's something that I've grown to love, and something, as many of you know, if I can make sure that nobody is looking around the corner. I am at the moment writing a novel, and I am finding myself wanting to do that, finding myself almost artistically compelled, if that's not too highfalutin a phrase, to do so. I like addressing the reader and you know, slapping them and you know, sitting them on my lap and, you know, making sure that they're exercised and, yeah, just keeping them involved. And I think it's a great method of doing it if you can do it somehow. It's almost an ineffable ability to do it without the whole thing collapsing in front of you, and it's a high wire act, but some people can do it really well. Trollope being, I think, the most available example. It was worth noting that my Canon EOS 2000 is actually only capable of recording for 12 minutes at a time, and I think I've been currently recording for about 11 or 12 minutes, so there will be a slight switch in a moment when I go from one recording to the other, but fear not, folks, I shall not descend into the artificial editorship of some of the more popular booktubers. But anyway, let's get on. Next up we have another characteristic of Victorian literature which I have pounced upon over the last few days, and that is there being very highly allusive, with a capital A. They relied on a readership that had a great bulk of learned knowledge. You know, they've done the hard graft, much of their readers, and had, you know, committed entire cantos by rote into their hippocampus, and they knew, you know, there were all sorts of regions and hotspots of the culture, of which my entire Generation Z are, you know, absolutely ruinously ignorant. But they rely. So they could easily rely on a readership that would be enlightened and excited by a reference to something that had happened 250 years ago. Whereas now you would just get a sort of a jaundiced, glum stare from somebody. If I were to write a book today and reference Mr. Byron or Mr. Dryden or Mr. Shakespeare, or even somebody who is actually really rather clever, if I were to mention Mr. Updike or, you know, Kurt Vonnegut or somebody like that, so that they did rely on a huge largesse of information being known by their readership, and that is an example in this. This is George Eliot's Middlemarch. Peerless, I think, in matters of characteristic exploration and in length, as you'll notice. So this is about Mr. Lydgate, who is the sort of exploratory doctor in here, and is somebody who will use methods heretofore unexplored. And this is Eliot's way of describing him, by alluding to somebody who she knows her readership will be aware of. Does it seem incongruous to you that a Middlemarch surgeon should dream of himself as a discoverer? Most of us, indeed, know little of the great originators until they have been lifted up among the constellations and already rule our fates. But that Herschel, for example, who broke the barriers of the heavens, that's in quotation marks, who broke the barriers of the heavens, did he not once play a provincial church organ and give music lessons to stumbling pianists? Each of these shining ones had to walk on the earth among neighbours who perhaps thought much more of his gait and his garments than of anything which was to give him a title to everlasting fame. You see there, but that Herschel, which of course has got a little number 75 next to it, which you can thumb through to at the back if in a modern context you don't know who Mr. Herschel was. Yeah, so very, very elusive, and yeah, they relied on their readers knowing an awful lot more than our readers do now. Next up, I don't really have an example for this hallmark or characteristic, but it does strike you that lots of the time they have an unashamed, they feel that they have an unashamed, particularly with people like Charles Dickens and Elizabeth Gaskell, actually, most notably, they have an unashamed and sometimes painfully instructional desideratum. They really have a social message and a moral purpose. They want to imbue you with their own cogitations and convolutions and considerations that have kept them up way past candlelight in the evening. Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South is probably again, something I was perhaps compelled or made to read at university as an undergraduate, essentially involving the migration north of a asset-rich, cash-poor southern family. I think their father dies, or they're somehow disinherited and have to move up north and downsize. And it is about what some people will then consider a miscegenation, or just at least an intertronation or a mix of the bulky impolite, intellectually inferior Northerners with the cultured socialites that are residing down south. And you see this with Dickens all the time about the plight of the poor, and many of his bildungsromans, David Copperfield mentioned earlier, Nicholas Nickleby, all talk about how it is that the real bottom of the bucket of society, the real sort of the real gutter dwelling crabs and rats are cast aside unfairly and are put at an almost irrevocable and unbeatable disadvantage. You sense all the time that they are really, really desperate to needle and pincer the establishment, capital E, whatever the hell that means, and point out injustices and perhaps make the world a little bit of a better place. That, of course, has spread into the weird, largely far-left ideology involved in personal identity politics and immutable characteristics nowadays. But yes, I think, of course, Shakespeare and Austen and people, Byron, heaven forbid, people before that were trying to introduce a social message into their work, but with the Victorians it feels sort of blatant and sometimes quite obtrusive and protuberant. It feels very obvious sometimes. And the final one that I want to talk about primarily is female emancipation. It's again not the coarse and incomprehensible female emancipation which is most often alluded to today, which means that the 18th wave feminists can walk into a boardroom in a bikini and suggest that if a gentleman looks at them for longer than a second, they are a homicidal sadist. I'm not talking about that kind of female emancipation. I'm talking about the original rewardable and unobjectionable one, where they deal with the social, political, if not, well, not quite legal or political, but at least the social, emancipation of women and their shackles either being completely lifted or at least loosened and retightened and loosened and retightened, whether that be via marriage to a particularly particularly august suitor, or a particularly shining example of somebody they would like to be the wife of. I'm reading, for example, at the moment I'm going to review this tomorrow for you, or at least on Monday maybe. This is Henry James' Washington Square, dealing with what's her name? Catherine Sloper, who has an overbearing and domineering father, but whose shackles are taken off of her because she's allowed to go out into the world, and she is allowed to mingle and ingratiate herself in higher New York society, but always feels the just always feels the hands of her father sort of in on her and impressing on her shoulders, and feels therefore unable to express herself fully. That might have been a little bit of a sophomoric description of the novel. I'm really, really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to reviewing it for you in a short period of time. But yes, that pretty much covers my hallmarks of the Victorian novel. Please let me know if I've missed out on any thematic garden rakes that you will comment about, and obviously I'm going to step on and they're going to thwack me in the face in a few moments' time. And whenever I turn the camera off, there does seem to be a time in which I, what the French have the phrase, the esprit de l'escalier, where you have a rebuttal for an opponent that comes to you in the dead of night rather than in the heat of the moment. That always happens to me, seemingly. But yes, if you have any Victorian characteristics that you think I have overseen or not picked up on, then please do let me know. But this is an experiment with my new Canon EOS 2000 camera. Thankfully, I can pop an SD card into the back of my Mac and see myself in HD. But yes, thanks ever so much for watching, BookTube, and goodbye.